Members, you are now live.
Good evening. Welcome to the Estimates Committee on Monday, March 1st, 4:30. We'll just call a roll call. Deputy Clerk, please call the roll.
Through the chair, the roll has been taken.
Thank you. Members of the committee, just a reminder of the following rules and procedures. All motions must be moved and seconded. Each speaking opportunity for members is 3 minutes. There's no time limit on the number of opportunities you may have to avail yourself to speak to any item. Going forward, is there any members of anybody have declaration of conflict of interest or anything on the agenda tonight? I see none. Thank you. Ms. Daniels, would you please provide an overview of the previous night's meeting numbers?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So our starting point this evening is a 2021 operating budget of $167,862,565. That's a budget impact after assessment growth of 2.62% and an average residential tax impact of 3.2% or $104.83. It's an average multi-residential tax impact of 2.92%, an average commercial impact of 1.01%, and an average industrial tax impact of 2.01%. And just a note for members of the committee and the viewing public that a revised worksheet was added as an addendum to tonight's agenda to correct the preamble at steps 7A, 8B, and 9D. Chair, would you like me to just go into step 7?
Yes, please.
So we are starting tonight at step 7, which is the operating budget for Brantford Fire. So information on this budget can be found beginning on page 36 of the 2021 operating budget documents. If you don't have that open, you can take the link that is at the step of the worksheet. The 2021 operating budget for the fire department totals $19,704,531 and is a 2.33% increase over last year.
Thank you, Ms. Daniels. I'd like to ask Fire Chief Todd Binkley to commence the presentation with respect to the 2021 Brantford Fire Budget presentation.
Good evening, everyone. Todd Binkley, Fire Chief. Through the chair, and I'll just wait for the presentation. Thank you. Through the chair and to the mayor and members of council, I am pleased to present the 2021 budget on behalf of the Brantford Fire Department. Before I begin, I would like to thank Deputy Chief Everett, Deputy Chief Pipe, and all our division chiefs for their assistance in putting together our budget. It is truly a collaborative effort. I would also like to thank our financial analyst, Anita Porteous, and the entire finance department for their assistance. Next slide, please. The Brantford Fire Department has a long and proud history of providing exceptional fire protection services to the city of Brantford. Our department has grown to 135 members that provide fire safety, education, prevention, code enforcement, and emergency response through 6 divisions: fire prevention, communications, suppression, emergency management, fleet and facilities, and professional standards and qualifications, all working towards one common goal of a fire-safe community. Next slide, please. 2020 was an extraordinary and challenging year for everyone, but with this council's continued support and commitment to our goal, the department was able to accomplish many objectives and progress the department forward. The department implemented a new computer-aided dispatch and record management software programs to improve dispatching capabilities and data management. We continue to advance and modernize our fleet with the arrival of a new pumper and the procurement of a new aerial device. We have also continued the process of changing fire prevention vehicles to more fuel-efficient, cost-effective vehicles with the purchase of our second hybrid car last year. Lastly, with the assistance of facilities and this council, we completed the construction and proudly opened new fire station number 2 on Fairview Drive. Next slide, please. I would like to highlight our priorities for 2021. The implementation of the Master Fire Plan Council and operational recommendations. In 2019, Council, through the Master Fire Plan report, adopted the Master Fire Plan in principle. This document will serve as our strategic framework for delivery of fire protection services for the next 10-year planning horizon. The Master Fire Plan contains 44 operational recommendations and 6 council recommendations. Operational recommendations are recommendations that the fire chief will implement under his current authority through the department's annual work plan over the next several years. Many of these recommendations were initiated in 2020 and will continue to be advanced in 2021. Council recommendations are recommendations that require the consideration and approval of council related to a potential operating or capital financing impact or to inform a municipal policy decision. 4 of the council recommendations regarding municipal policy decisions, including setting a municipal service level or where further direction to corporate staff may be required. These 4 recommendations will be implemented through revisions of the fire department's establishing and regulating bylaw by way of a report to council in 2021. The remaining 2 council recommendations involve immediate term staffing considerations that have operating and capital budget impacts that require council's consideration through the estimates committee. The department is bringing forward one of these recommendations as an unmet need for consideration that I will speak to in a moment. Over the past few years, the department has progressively implemented new equipment and technology, and we will continue to pursue advancements in technological solutions to ensure effective and cost-effective, efficient fire service delivery. The department will continue to explore and expand partnerships and seek opportunities that will enhance public safety, provide efficiencies, or increase revenue. The department has had success with our partnerships with the County of Brant Fire Department and the Six Nations Fire and Rescue for emergency response, training initiatives, and dispatching. This aligns with council's priority of continuing to build strong relationships with neighboring communities to support common goals and joint ventures. As a department, we will continue to seek partnerships with our neighboring communities and seek opportunities to grow our potential for revenue, especially in the communications division. We have and will continue to invest in the development of our personnel and technology in our communications center in an effort to build our customer base. Next slide, please. Our budget pressures and challenges for 2021 include the Brantford Professional Firefighters Association has been without a contract since December 31st of 2018. We have continued to meet with the association over the past year and are hopeful a settlement can be reached in the near future. The COVID-19 pandemic has significantly impacted all services within the city, including frontline emergency responders. We have the ability to track and predict direct costs associated with the pandemic, such as increases in necessary personal protective equipment and cleaning supplies. However, there is also an increase in indirect costs for staffing and service delivery as individuals cope with personal and family anxieties and obligations. These indirect costs present a challenge for the department to accurately predict and manage. Lastly, similar to many other fire departments and emergency services, mental health injuries and strategies to mitigate those injuries represent a significant challenge. We recognize that emergency responders have an increased risk of occupational mental health injuries, and we will continue to implement proactive strategies such as our peer-to-peer team, road to mental readiness, and crisis intervention teams to attempt to minimize those affected. However, if provincial rates are an indicator, we expect an increase in these type of injuries. Next slide, please. In recognition of the need to be fiscally responsible, the Fire Command team went through the budget line by line to look for efficiencies and to increase revenue. During the year, the command team meets monthly to ensure that the checks and balances are in place to ensure that spending is necessary and needed. We have realized some reductions by finding efficiencies and reducing line items to reflect historic actuals. As you are aware, wages and benefits represent over 94% of our budget. Next slide, please. Our 2021 net tax supported budget as presented is just over $19,700,000. Next slide, please. This represents an increase of 2.3% or just under $450,000. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the fire department is presenting one unmet need for 2021, resulting from the Master Fire Plan Council recommendation. The Master Fire Plan recommended increasing the number of firefighters on duty from 19 to 21 by increasing the number of personnel assigned to the aerial at Station 1. Currently, the aerial at Station 1 is staffed with 2 personnel when the department is at minimum staffing of 19 firefighters. When only 2 people are assigned to the aerial, it cannot function as an initial response apparatus on its own. If the minimum staffing on this apparatus was increased to 4, it could respond to a second emergency call as an initial response apparatus and complete the same operational task of that of a pumper. The historical average call volume analyzed within the Master Fire Plan for Station 1 for a 4-year period, 2014 to 18, is 2,004 calls per year. This number has significantly increased in the last 2 years. As the most centrally located station, there is a high degree of probability of simultaneous emergency calls in Station 1 area. In the event that a pumper assigned to Station 1 is committed at an emergency call, the next closest emergency response apparatus in Station 1's response district is the aerial. Increasing the minimum number of firefighters on duty from 19 to the proposed minimum complement of 21 firefighters by increasing the staffing on the aerial improves both the depth of response capabilities of the BFD for assembling 8 firefighters, typically 2 trucks, and 12 firefighters, typically 3 trucks, on scene within 8 minutes of travel time, and aligns with our strategy of continuous improvement. Next slide, please. In 2016, Council set the minimum number of firefighters on duty at 19, recognizing the importance of firefighter and public safety. The significance of this number of firefighters is that the department meets the requirement for minimum initial response of 14 firefighters, 15 if an aerial device is used, for providing interior firefighting and search and rescue in a 2-story single-family dwelling, as set out in the National Fire Protection Association Standard 1710, the standard for organization and deployment of fire suppression operations by career fire departments. Since Council's passing of the minimum number of firefighters and the adoption of the Fire Master Plan in principle, NFPA Standard 1710 changed in 2020. It is now considered best practice for a minimum response of 16 firefighters, 17 if an aerial device is used, for a 2-story single-family dwelling. This necessitates a response from all 4 stations to a single structure fire and leaves the department without a resource in reserve to respond to other incidents. In order to meet this standard with the same level of service, the department will need to increase the minimum number of firefighters on duty. The most effective way to accomplish this is by increasing the number of firefighters on the aerial. This will require the fire department to hire 8 firefighters, 2 per platoon. The department is recommending hiring these firefighters over a 2-year period and will necessitate another unmet need in 2022. The number of suppression firefighters has not increased since 2003 and 2004 with the opening of station number 4. Since this time, the city has significantly grown in population and in area, and the average annual call volume has increased 125%. The approval of this unmet need will allow the department to continue to provide effective and efficient fire protection services to the community. Next slide, please. I would like to take this opportunity to remind everyone to plan and practice their home escape plans. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to present this year's operating budget, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chief, and I'm sure there will be questions. Any questions of members of the committee? Councilor Weaver, you're first on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Chief. On that graph you just showed, it went from, I think, 2000 to 4, and then it jumped to 2017. Could we get the data for the in between? Is that possible? Is that going to be an onerous amount of work for you?
Through the chair, no, sir. I actually have the data right in front of me. What we were trying to show in the graph is that it has significantly increased from not only from that period of time to today, but also that it's been a general increase on a year-to-year basis. But we have that, I have that data in front of me and can supply that to council.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to see, if it was a gradual increase or if it was a sharp bump. That's what I was looking for. So if you could provide that to council, I'd appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Councillor Weaver. Councillor Martin, you now have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the chief. When Station 4 was open, the chief of the day insisted on having 5 firefighters on duty on the pumper and some of the other pumpers as well. Is that still the practice, or have you dropped back to the normal 4?
Through the chair, we are minimum staffing on a pumper is 4. If we have excess staff, then we up staff on a pumper to 5. But in general terms, yeah, 4 is the standard response on a pumper now.
How many do you have on the aerial when you go up to 5 on a pumper?
So through the chair, our policy is first to staff the aerial up to 4, and then any excess above that we would put on the pumper.
Okay. I'm glad to see that's the practice going forward, because that's what I was suggesting at the time when the chief was insisting on 5 per pumper. Okay, that's my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Utley, you're next. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the chief. Chief, thank you for your presentation. The numbers on the one graph that showed calls from each of the stations with Clarence, no doubt about it, is number 1 in terms of calls. The other 3 seem to be fairly consistent over that time period. And have you tried, or is it possible to try and balance out those calls to other stations?
Through the chair, the response districts are set with the NFPA standard 1410 with a 4-minute response time. So to balance out response would necessitate us increasing response times to that number 1 station, and wouldn't be advisable.
Appreciate that. So it's very time constrained. Whether you like it or not, you got 4 minutes to response time.
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Todd.
Thank you, Councillor Utley. Councillor Celeste, you're next. You have the floor, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief, can you explain to me, when you were explaining the need for more folks, you indicated that if we had a 2-story residential home on fire, if a second one broke out while they were addressing the first fire, we would have nobody to send to the second fire. Did I understand that correctly?
So through the chair, so up until recently to the change of this standard, we would send 3 stations to a single family dwelling, which would leave us 1 apparatus to respond to another call. We also use callbacks, off-duty staff, and we also have mutual aid. With the impact of this new standard, which we are still currently evaluating how we are going to respond to it, it would necessitate us at minimum staffing. We would have to use all 4 stations to meet that 16 or 17 on duty to make to that standard.
Okay, and just one further, if I could, Mr. Chair. When you say a standard, is that a legal obligation, or is that best practice, or is that something everybody aspires to be?
So through the chair, NFPA standards are not legislated standards. What they are, though, considered best practice, and they are frequently used by the Ministry of Labor or arbitrations as the best practice and kind of the standard we are held to. We can see that in the recent standard in recent arbitration in Sudbury, where they use that standard as to increase staffing on the pumps in Greater Sudbury. So
Okay, thank you. Alrighty, thanks, Chief. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Celeste. Next, I have Councillor McCurry. Councillor McCurry, you have the floor, sir.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Thank you, Todd, for being here today. Always a pleasure. Could you explain the changes in revenue primarily related to WSIB recoveries?
Through the chair, the revenue is, I guess, pay money given back to us from WSIB.
And why?
So through the chair, we have members who are off on a long-term leave due to mental health injuries.
Okay, so what's your prognosis for the next year, Todd?
Through the chair, we believe we will be about the same for next year in recoveries from WSIB.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor McCurry. I have no other speakers in the queue. I'm going to move on to 7C. There's only one unmet need for the Brantford Fire below, and that's, of course, the 4 full-time firefighters. 7C1, staff recommended. It's a cost of $225,130, and that's the incremental increase is $96,000. So is there a mover to move this to March 8th? Councilor Martin.
Yeah, I'll move that. Thanks.
Seconded by Councilor Weaver. I see saw your hand up. Okay. Okay. Any questions on that, Councilor Martin? Your hand's still up? Okay. No problem. All right, then I'm going to call the question. I'm moving this to March 8th.
Through the chair, we're just waiting for Councillor McCreary and Mayor Davis to cast their vote.
Yeah, my vote's yes.
My vote is yes as well. I have a technical difficulty.
The referral of item 7C1 carries unanimously on recorded votes. Members of the committee vote in favor as follows: Councillors Spanner-Stelt, Celeste, Marn, Antosky, Wall, Weaver, Utley, McCreary, Carpenter, Van Tilburg, and Mayor Davis.
Thank you. Moving on now to step 7D. Is there any members of the committee that are required to make any increases or decreases to this budget? I see none, no hands up. Okay, Ms. Daniels, could you please give us an overview of 8888B, please?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So we are moving on now to step 8, which is the Community Services and Social Development 2021 operating budget. So information on this budget can be found beginning on page 77 of the preliminary 2021 operating budget document. Again, if you don't have that open, you can take the link that's at step A of the worksheet. So the commission does have a 2021 budget totaling $15,848,236. Family and income support is a 6.9% increase. Housing and homelessness, 1.63% increase, and community programs and social development with an 11.25% decrease for an overall commission decrease of 0.45%. But when we do take into account the savings seen in this commission as a result of the corporate-wide reorg, the comparable year-over-year increase is 3.35%.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to ask Aaron Wallace, Acting General Manager of Community Services and Social Development, to commence with your operating budget presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair Carpenter, through you to members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to bring forward our 2021 operating budget. I do want to just take a moment and introduce my colleagues that are on the virtual call with me. So I do have Sue Evenden, our Director of Family and Income Stability, Mary Ellen McClellan, our Director of Housing and Homelessness, and for the first time, starting today, our new General Manager of Community Services and Social Development, Marlene Miranda, is on the call with us as well. So welcome, Marlene. We do have a number of members of our team supporting this budget presentation on the call as well. So I'll just move to the first slide, our commission overview. I know that council is well aware of our departments and our programs, but just briefly for members of the public, the commission does have 3 departments. The first is housing and homelessness. They have a number of functions. One of the things that they do is take care of our affordable housing rental units and all of the things associated with that. So they take care of those tenants, they take care of the units themselves, they manage the wait list, and they collect the fees and the rental revenue for that, for those accommodations. Housing also works closely with community partners like JCs or Victoria Parks Homes to make sure they have the supports they need to offer affordable housing. We also build new affordable housing. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Also, we have a number of housing stability programs. Those would be for folks that are homeless or at risk of homelessness, such as our emergency shelter program or our homelessness prevention programs. Second department is family and income stability. That is the department that provides social assistance, some targeted youth programs, and also some other benefits for situations where the family is in a low need, a low income scenario. Third department is community programs and social development. That is community recreation. Some of the community programs we run, such as your age-friendly plan, Healthy Kids, and of course, the children's services and early years component of that. So if we go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about how these departments support council priorities. I'll start with affordable housing. We know that is a top priority of this council and of this community. Much smarter people than me have talked about why affordable housing is good social policy, but we do know that many of the challenges that communities face, like homelessness, like substance abuse, and other community challenges, are related to a lack of affordable housing, and particularly a lack of what we call supportive housing. That's a place where a person can both afford the rent and also have some social work or other treatment supports around them. So this city has set a target of 506 new affordable housing units in the next 10 years. We'd also like to support our nonprofit community partners in building another 250 as well. And the reason we've set those targets is we do need to build affordable housing pretty rapidly to keep up with population growth, but we'd also like to chip away at that wait list and give as many people as possible an opportunity to have affordable housing. And I should say we're well on our way. We know this work has been supported by both Mayor Bailey and Mayor Davis through the Mayor's Housing Partnership Task Force. And so previous work of council and also that action plan, we do have over 170 units either completed or in the approval process. We are making very good progress on that 506. I believe we're going to meet or even exceed that target. And certainly we'll do everything we can to support our community partners in building and providing as much housing as we can. The next three, seniors, neighborhoods, and children and youth, of course, those are priorities of council as well. There is a report going to committee tomorrow night that talks about those in some detail as part of our community well-being planning. So I won't belabor it here as part of this process, but I should say that I believe that the way the commission has been set up, the way we have brought recreation together with community services, there's tremendous opportunity to support children and seniors as well. And of course, that's excellent social policy, and we know a priority of council as well. So I'll save my enthusiasm on those for tomorrow night, but there's lots of opportunity there for the commission as we move forward. The fourth one there is, the fifth one there is climate change. And I know that feels a little out of place in a community services presentation. But what I should say is, of course, we build new buildings and we update buildings. And of course, we always want to be mindful that we are part of the corporate climate change action plan. We are certainly helping council respond to the climate change emergency. And so when we build or we update buildings, we always do that with an eye to environmental stewardship. And also, we'd like to help little kids be excited about the environment as well. So a lot of initiatives you see us do, especially through Healthy Kids, like community gardening or Nature is Best Passport, is really trying to get those kids connected to their natural heritage and to be supporters and champions of their natural environment as they get older. You'll actually see a report go to committee as well tomorrow night that talks about the Kids Ride Free program, which started out as a Healthy Kids initiative. And now we're looking for council direction on whether we'd like to continue that program for the 0 to 12s to ride Brantford Transit for free. And of course, if we can create that next generation of ridership, maybe those are kids that are less likely to drive their car or more likely to use public transit as they go. The next one there is economic recovery. Obviously, the mayor has worked closely with economic development, the Chamber of Commerce, and other partners to create an economic recovery action plan. And we like to think we're a part of that too. A lot of the work that we do in our commission is about connecting people to employment resources, connecting them to school. We know that affordable, accessible childcare is at the heart of an economic recovery. We know that in an economic crisis, women and low-income families are typically the hardest hit, particularly in a crisis like this, where it certainly hit the retail sector very hard. And so our ability to continue to support that sector and make sure that people have access to affordable, high-quality childcare is a part of our collective economic recovery. I'll just go to the last one briefly here. I talk about an efficient and responsive department. We know as part of Council's review of all city departments in 2019, one of the threads that ran through that, one of the guiding principles for us was to be an efficient and responsive commission when we look to supporting individuals and families in this community. So efficient means a few different things to us. Efficient means, of course, we are looking to get as much provincial and federal investment in this community as we can. And so through our housing department, through our community programs department, and otherwise, we're trying to apply for grants every chance we get and bring that investment to this community. We also want to look at the investment already being made in this community, either by council or otherwise, and how do we redirect some of that money into more modern approaches. The recently approved shelter diversion program and the library outreach worker are good examples of money that existed in budgets, but how could we use it differently to respond better to the community? And certainly partnerships are a part of that as well. The service review talked about the use of partnerships, the use of other community agencies, aligning our goals with them, and partners like Rosewood House, the Grand River Council on Aging, the Grand River Community Healthcare Center, just to name a few, have been excellent partners both in the work we do every day and as part of our COVID response, as we've set up isolation shelters, as we've done emergency childcare and other responses to the pandemic. So I'll go to the next slide here and I'll talk a little bit about budget pressures and challenges. So this first one, I think that we've talked about every year, at least every year that I've been a part of the budget presentation. So this is changes in provincial funding. And so in this case, we're talking about some reductions in provincial funding. So as this committee knows, over the last couple of years, there's been a decrease of about $1.5 million through our Ontario Works program. That's the program that provides social assistance. That was the removal of the Addiction Services Initiative and the removal of the employment component of what that work is, which is now being done by a third-party provider. We do believe that there's going to be similar changes in children's services towards the end of the year. And so what we're going to do is bring a report forward on Wednesday morning to Social Services Committee to talk further about that. The second one there is the 2021 rent freeze and arrears. So just wanted to make committee aware of that. I'm going to pause there. I'm getting jabbered, so I'm wondering if you can still hear me, Chair Carpenter.
Yes, no problem. We can hear you.
Okay. Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone could still hear me and I wasn't frozen up on my end. So I'll continue there. One of the pressures we're seeing is a rent freeze. And so what that means is we are not able to raise the rents on the rental units that we deliver on behalf of the community. It has a pretty significant impact in terms of our revenue to the tune of about $80,000. Now, of course, we understand the social policy implications of that. During a time of hardship, we don't want to see people's rents get raised. But one of the opportunities we have, especially in affordable housing, is that often the money to pay the rent is coming from other government sources, whether that's Ontario Works or ODSP. And so we're able to raise those rents, collect more revenue into the program without negatively affecting the individuals that live in those rental units. So that is a hit to revenue, because we do fall under that rent freeze legislation. The other piece of the rental revenue we should look at, although it doesn't hit the bottom line in this budget, is collecting rent. And so we know that we're in a much higher situation for rental arrears. And that doesn't mean that we won't at some point get that money back, but with the rent freeze, we believe some individuals have interpreted that as potentially not having to pay their rent for the duration of the pandemic. And so, and the landlord and tenant tribunal is also moving slowly and it's sometimes closed. So we're not able to pursue those repayment plans as efficiently as we would. Now, again, we haven't accounted for that in this budget. And again, we'll do the work that we always need to do to have those arrears come to good and get that money back. but it is something we wanted to flag for committee. The next one I want to talk about is insurance and accommodation costs. So insurance in affordable housing is rising fairly quickly, to the tune of about $100,000 in additional costs for our insurance. And our accommodation costs are going up as well, but only because we have changes to our provincial funding. So I can appreciate that human services budgets are frustrating at the best of times to understand, but so what happens is when we lose provincial revenue and we lose provincial programs, we're not able to bill those programs a share of the accommodations costs. So when we lose programs like the addiction services initiatives or employment services, we're not able to ask the province to pick up their share of the tab in those programs for the space we have, particularly at 220 Colburn. So what happens is, because we still have the space, more of that cost is being borne by the municipal budget, to the tune of this year about $125,000. So I just want to pause there just for 1 second, because that's a lot of information just in those first couple of bullet points. But when you look at the rent freeze, insurance, and accommodations costs all together, that is a huge proportion of the increase to our budget that we're talking about this evening. But I should say that even though we understand that some of those costs are unavoidable and the city can't necessarily control what happens at a provincial level, we still have some strategies in place to try to address those. We believe that if we were to bring our insurance into a corporate insurance policy, there may be some savings there just by economies of scale. And of course, council has been very forward thinking in terms of accommodation costs by looking at how we can decentralize community services and deliver this program out of sites we already own or operate, like rec centers, housing sites, or other assets we have. So I think this council has been forward thinking on that. And as we see reductions in provincial revenue, more of those costs could hit the municipal taxpayer. But we are doing that work with our facilities group to try to limit that exposure and decentralize that work the best that we can. The fourth one there is around support for neighborhood associations. There is no municipal impact to this. We just wanted to flag this as a pressure within our programming. And it's a good news story. We have a number of neighborhood associations that do incredible work. This council will recall that Neighbors Helping Neighbors was a really important, continues to be an important platform for how we operate our COVID response and how we get the community helping each other. But there's a lot of neighborhood associations with a lot of good ideas. So in the coming year, we're going to give some thought to how we can best support those, maybe realign our staffing resources a bit to make sure when those good ideas come forward, we can support those. And the last thing I wanted to flag here, just in this budget pressures and challenges slide, and I'll talk more about this as we go, is the cost of the homelessness response, which does continue to increase. And we are looking at an unmet need related to our homelessness program. But I'll come back to that in just a moment. So if we go to the next slide, I'll touch very briefly on this one. This is our commission's share of the whole corporate budget, and then of course the share that each departments have of the commission budget. So we'll go to the next slide beyond that. So I won't go through this building the budget slide in a lot of detail. I tried to pick out what was relevant in terms of the accommodations and insurance costs, but I do appreciate that the building the budget slide can be a little bit frustrating to read, just because there are so many different pieces of funding that come into the budget and go out. You can see there are changes in provincial and federal revenue. But I do want to pause on the efficiency slide. I talked a little broadly about efficiencies and how we work with partners and we want to maximize provincial and federal revenue. But we also know that we're working in a very new environment. So the efficiencies that we identify also include reductions to postage, printing, mileage, training, those kinds of things. And even though some of those lines are provincially funded, we know there's only one taxpayer. So whether the money that we get to deliver this service comes from your property tax, or it's deducted from your paycheck, or it's added at the hardware store as HST, we know this money comes from the community and it needs to be invested as wisely as possible. So where the money wasn't going to be returned to the province, we've realigned those budgets. So in the case of, say, children's services, we maybe don't need to do a lot of printing. Can we use more of that money to help low-income families get accessible childcare through a fee subsidy program? So where we can give the money back to the budgets, whether municipally, provincially, or federally, we do. and where that money is going to stay as investment in the community, we do make sure that where there's efficiencies, we can redirect that money to client service. I'll talk about the restructure line, which I know is eye-catching as well in just a moment. I won't repeat everything that's on this slide, but certainly we're happy to answer any questions about it as we go. So I will move to the next slide. And here you see the raw numbers per department. And I think it's important to note here for members of the public that there is a lot of investment that comes through this commission, almost to the tune of $78 million. Much of that money going directly to individuals through social assistance payments or to landlords through rent subsidies. A lot of it goes to our provider agencies that do a great job of providing programs on behalf of the municipality. Of course, some of it goes out to childcare operators and other partners to deliver children's services programs. So it's a huge scope of a budget, and the municipal portion of it is just a fraction of it as we go. And I'll go to the next slide. Okay, so here, as Ms. Daniels said, is the final analysis as the budget shakes out. So I did want to address that $585,000. So, of course, part of the savings represented in the corporate finance budget is a result of the corporate restructure that we were a part of. And also, we've identified a number of savings of supplies, services, and other things that we won't be using during the COVID time. And we've applied those back to corporate finance to address some of the COVID pressures that they have. But the 585 isn't true savings, and you see it added back into the budget there. What that 585 represents mostly is that as part of the restructure, we took money that was for facilities out of the recreation budget. And I know this feels like a very administrative detail to provide in such a big scope of a presentation. But the reasons that's important is we do think that leads to further efficiencies in two ways. To have the facilities group take care of the facilities obviously allows them to find their efficiencies, to bundle things together like contracts and maintenance. And in future years, you'll see some efficiencies come out of that. And of course, they have the expertise to take care of those community centers better than we would as the recreation team. And it allows the recreation staff to not have to focus on fixing toilets or other facilities related activities. They can really focus on going back to those council priorities on seniors and children and youth and all of those other priorities that we want to commit to on behalf of council. So that is what that 585 represents in that slide. So I'll move past that. And I have one last slide, and this is about our unmet needs. So this is for 10 additional beds, emergency shelter beds at Rosewood House. And the annualized cost there you see is $211,000. A little bit reduced this year because we're able to apply some provincial dollars against the 2021 year, but the full cost is $200,011 in future years. So I do want to note, just as we put this unmet need forward for council's consideration, we know that homeless beds are not a strategic response to homelessness. We know that for communities that are addressing this, the focus really needs to be affordable housing. And affordable housing is actually a much cheaper response than homeless beds. It costs about $1,977 a month to keep someone in a homeless shelter. And it costs about $750 a month to keep someone in affordable housing. And that's before you can collect the rent. So if someone's in a shelter, you cannot collect the rent. There is no opportunity for revenue. That's against the law. And I know that we've taken that issue provincially and look to advocate for different legislation around that. Not that we're trying to charge people rent that live in emergency shelters, but we do know as part of a social assistance check or as part of a Ontario disability check, people are eligible to get money for their rent costs. But certainly we can't charge that rent if they're living in an emergency shelter, but we could if they were living in an affordable housing unit. So it's much cheaper to keep people in or to give people the opportunity for affordable housing than it is to put them in emergency shelter. And we know this council is taking a strategic approach to this. I talked a little bit about the Mayor's Housing Partnership Task Force and a number of units that are coming online. I talked a little bit about the library outreach worker, the shelter diversion program. We have initial approval for 25 more units at Colburn Street West, which is specifically designed to keep seniors out of the shelter system. We have the 30 units at Marlene Ave, Those are for folks that are have some challenges related potentially to addictions or mental health, and trying to give them the supports they need. So as a community, we're doing all of the right things in terms of kind of a short-term strategy to address the issue. The problem is we think we need these 10 beds in the system, especially when these isolation shelters close that are provincially funded coming into April, that we want to have enough beds in the system to make sure those folks have an opportunity to have some place to go, while some of these other programs like shelter diversion or 177 Colburn Street West are coming online. We are hopeful that in future years, we can come back and say, we don't need as many beds, take some away from us, because these other programs are doing their trick in terms of reducing that cost of homelessness. But we are putting this forward as an unmet need now, because we do think we need it in the system going forward. So with that, I will pause there. And I know that was a lot of information, but happy to answer any questions as we go. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Excellent presentation. I do have a number of questions from members of the committee, starting off with Councillor Van Tilburg, Mayor Davis, Van Pelt, and Sless. Councillor Van Tilburg, you have the floor.
Amazing work, Aaron, and it's probably a thankless job for everybody in the social service community. I'm sure you all have your individual victories, but I mean as a whole. So to everybody in your team and all the work, I just want you to get that message through to them all, that we appreciate all the very hard work that they do. Now, I got a question about the provincial funding and the changes to third-party services. In other words, it's almost as if they're saying, we're to fix the problem, but now you're not going to give us the money to fix the problem. Even if we wish to use a third party or not use a third party, we're not given that option. Why is that now happening from a provincial sphere in an area that they have forced onto us as our jurisdiction?
Yeah, through the chair, I'll give the best answer I can. That's a very complicated question that I might not have a fulsome answer to. But I think there's two things. I think as committee has identified, there is sometimes some downloading that happens where the province says, we'd like to continue this program, but we'd like the municipality to pick up a greater share of the cost. And so that is something we're seeing happening in children's services, where the expectation is we want to still see this happen the way it's happening, but we need the municipality to pay more of the admin charges or more of the program dollars. So that's one thing that sometimes happens. But in fairness to the province and the work that they're attempting to do, there's also a lot of work around modernizing social assistance. So some of the work they want to do is about how do you make it a better experience for the client in terms of, can they apply online? Can they get virtual services? Can we be more efficient in how we determine if someone's eligible, rather than somebody bringing in a sheath of papers to a local office? Can they submit some of that stuff online? So the reduction in funding is mostly those two things. It's an attempt to modernize traditional social services and to say to municipalities, okay, we don't want the work done in that way anymore. We want it done in a more modern way. And in the case of social assistance, maybe it's them doing the intake, them taking the call, but there is often a function of downloading where the work should continue as is, but they want the municipality to pay a higher share.
Well, we pay the full share on Ontario Works, do we not?
Through the chair, no. You pay 50% of the administrative costs, and the province pays 100% of the benefits. So a check that someone receives in their hand, that's provincial money, not municipal money.
And so so we're paying the administration of it?
Correct. Through the chair, there's a few different funding pieces within Ontario Works, just to confuse the matter further. But in a general sense, the city pays about half of the administration costs. And when I say the city, I mean the county of Brant picks up their share, and the province pays the other half of the administration cost, which is largely salary and benefits. And then the actual money that goes to a client, that's provincial money.
Okay, so employment services, that as part of Ontario Works, that's been removed from us totally, or are we still doing so?
So through the chair, the official answer is we are no longer doing employment services. That's being done by a third-party provider. One of the challenges is, of course, that provider would like individuals to be as job ready as possible, understandably, so that they can transition that person to employment. But there is a lot of work to be done before that happens. So we do a lot of, yeah.
Thank you, Eric. Because you're hitting my point. There's a lot of work to be done before that happens. So when I think about things like job ready, mental health, and addictions, and we're like, really, we're having those that's the very funding for administration they're pulling away from us. Some of the most crucial things that put people in the situation where we're having to add beds to places like Rosewood, or having to put in more targeted affordable housing. So I guess my question would be, how do we put mental health and addictions, particularly, which is one of those strongest elements of putting people that are puts them towards poverty and onto the street, basically, things go really wrong. Who's going to get control of that ball? Because it looks like they're taking those services away, but if it fails, we're holding the bag, and we're not going to be able to provide the mental health and addictions help that people require, and that is heading towards crisis levels. So could you answer that, and then I can let the other councillors have their say.
Okay.
Yeah, through the chair, I think there is good news on that front. You're exactly right to say that when things go badly and a person ends up in a homelessness situation or otherwise, often the municipality needs to do some work around that. But I think there is good news. I think the province did recognize that the previous system of local health integration networks, or LINs as they were commonly called, was not the most ideal way to provide healthcare. So one of the really productive things that's happened over the last year is that there is now a Brantford Brant Ontario health team. And one of their priority populations that they put forward as part of their application was the homeless population. So I think there is some productive work happening. Now that's easy to say, and of course we need to get that work on the ground and find people. But I think that is a good step forward in terms of the healthcare sector recognizing homelessness as a challenge and making that a priority. And hopefully, as you say, that's going to reduce the folks that need our help because they have fallen through the cracks because of their health condition.
Thank you very much, Aaron.
Thank you, Councillor Van Tilburg, for your question. Mayor Davis, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Aaron. Aaron, I want to start with the unmet need, which is the annualized shelter bed. So if I got it straight, that is essentially taking what we did last year, which was increase the capacity, and then continuing it.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. So why do you set it up as an unmet need? Why wouldn't it just be built into the base budget?
So through the chair, this budget actually includes 20 additional beds. We had approval from council to put 10 in the base budget, and so you do see those in there. We did not have formal approval from council for the second 10, and so we brought those through this process for committee's consideration.
Okay, but it's not intended to increase the level of service from last year. It's just to maintain it.
Through the chair, that's correct. This, if it were to be approved by this committee, this May would look the same as last May. That's correct.
Yeah, and although there isn't necessarily a direct relationship, do you agree that the number of shelter beds we have and the number of semi-permanent encampments, I mean, they're related, are they not? More of one, less of the other, less of one, more of the other?
Through the chair, I think so. I think it's challenging to draw a straight cause and effect line. I think what people with greater expertise in homelessness than I have would say is, of course, if there's an option for someone to sleep indoors, they may well choose that. We know that shelters don't allow a person to be with a spousal partner, don't allow pets. Sometimes the person's health condition is so poor in terms of mental health or addictions that they can't stay in a shelter. So shelter beds are certainly a part of it, but more affordable housing units and that really intensive healthcare are the other pieces of that puzzle.
Right. And so how are we generally doing in terms of capacity? What if we do this, which is maintain the level we have and continue it, where do you project we'll be running in terms of what percentage of that will be used on average? And I realize it varies between summer and winter, but.
So through the chair, we believe, and it's a fairly imperfect science, and one of the challenges in doing this kind of analysis is we have that provincially funded isolation shelter where we took folks that were medically vulnerable and put them in a different shelter. to protect them from COVID. But we believe all of that to say that if we had these 10 beds in the system, which again, like you say, is the same number we had last year, we do well with our shelter diversion. And we continue to work towards our goal of having 25 additional units on Colburn Street West, that we should be able to have enough capacity in the system for next winter. Although, just to be completely transparent in this process, no community seems to have enough emergency shelter beds. So I would never make the commitment to council that you wouldn't run out of beds, but as close as a scientific analysis as we could do seems to suggest that maintaining the level of beds that we have is adequate for this community.
Okay. Chair, I think I've hit 3 minutes. Can you put me back down unless some of my other questions are asked by other members? So.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Next, I have Councillor Sless.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Vanderstel, your hand was up. Did you put it down?
I did, Mr. Chair. Thank you for recognizing that. The mayor, once again, stole my question and my thunder. Thank you.
Okay, apologies. Councillor Sless, you have the floor, sir.
Yeah, actually, the mayor touched on the things I wanted to talk about as well, and that was, Aaron, as we continue to build affordable housing, should we see the rate of shelter use proportionately decrease?
Through the chair, is a good question. So there is a huge demand for affordable housing beyond the shelter system. So we talk about those 1,700 households that are eligible for it, but can't get it because we don't have enough. But I think the general answer is yes. I mean, the more that we can provide good low-income housing for folks that need it, the less folks will have on the wait list. If you're on the wait list, that means you can't afford where you're currently living. So you're always going to be at risk of homelessness. I think the real mechanism to try to kind of drive down the investment in homelessness is supportive housing. A lot of those folks using the shelter system, they need a place to live where they can afford it, but they also need some of those social work and medical supports. So those two things in tandem, I think, will get us where we need to go.
Okay, and I think you said that we had capacity last night for in our shelter system. Did I hear that?
Oh, through the chair, if I was asked that, I apologize. I think I missed that question, but yes, we did have capacity last night. I apologize.
Okay, because it's just, I saw a person, it was under, whoever it was under a pile of covers and things in the old Browns building on Market Street behind a cardboard box sleeping this morning about 9 o'clock. And I didn't know whether we had sold out or not sold out, but had gone to capacity and couldn't accommodate that person. Maybe it's one of those people that don't want to be in a shelter. I don't know, but it was a sad situation. It was pretty cold out. And anyway, having said that, in the efficiencies line that you showed, it was $200 and some thousand in efficiencies that you found or identified. A lot of that was travel, training, all the types of things that we're not doing because of COVID. But next year, God willing, there won't be COVID. So will that become then a need of $250,000 in next year's budget?
So through the chair, no, and I will throw myself on the mercy of the treasurer if I get this wrong. So what you see in this budget that I presented is costs that we don't need this year and we won't need next year. Those are just efficiencies. Okay. But we did identify additional ones for the treasurer that would stay in our base budget and come back to us next year. But those were applied to any sort of COVID pressures that the municipality had. So it's kind of two different baskets. What you see, we're not asking for next year. What we won't use because of COVID is in a different budget line.
Okay. And just a couple more. Can you supply us with a list of programs that we administer and serve people with that are not mandated? Can you supply me with that list? I'm sure there are some, and maybe we need them all. I don't know, but I don't know what that list is, but I'd like to see it. If that could be supplied to the committee.
Sure, yeah. We can pull that together.
Okay. I guess I'd like to make a statement. We really shouldn't use the word affordable housing because in most cases it's not affordable. It's affordable by somebody's definition that lives somewhere but not here. And I think what we're really talking about is subsidized housing and housing that is truly affordable. And I don't know if we're building enough of that. We build on Grand River Ave, for instance, there's an affordable housing apartment building going up that looks quite large. I don't know how many units, but quite a few units on Grand River Ave going up right now, not opened yet. But those, for the people looking for housing, are not really affordable. Nobody's going to give them a supplement, I don't think, unless, correct me if I'm wrong, for them to be allowed to live there. So we're building these things, but the price to get in far exceeds the means to pay it. So when we say affordable, I think we should really qualify what we're saying. It's affordable by somebody's definition, but not by somebody's pocketbook, because they simply can't afford to pay those prices. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, through the chair, when I talk about this, I sometimes say, well, capital A affordable housing, it's exactly what you're describing, which is subsidized. So that you've met a certain income threshold, you're eligible for the program, you can go on a wait list and you can either get the unit or we can get some sort of subsidy to you so you can live wherever you want, but not pay as much as you would need to in the open market because we're going to pay part of that rent for you. So that's kind of that's a social program. But you're exactly right to say sometimes, even though there is a development charge incentive to create affordable housing, that affordable housing, that's outside of our social programs. That's around 80% of market rate. And so depending on where market rate is, you're exactly right. It could be designated as affordable housing under the development charge waiver rules, but it might still be tough for people to afford that. When we talk about social housing, exactly right. We're talking about a social program where somebody's eligible because of their income.
Okay, and just finally, if I could, Mr. Chair, if I have time, is there a way to consolidate? We have so many housing portfolios. We've got some that we use. We got some that are subsidized. We got some that aren't subsidized. We got some that we partner with the county with. And for people that don't sit on social housing or social services, and even those that do, it's very, very confusing to keep your eye. There's too many balls in the air, and you end up dropping some because you really don't understand it fully. And I know most people, I certainly get confused, and I know others do too, whether they want to admit it or not. It's very confusing. And is there a way to simplify that program so that when we're dealing with it, we understand exactly what we're dealing with?
So through the chair, I think the short answer is not yet. So the reason there's so many programs is because whether it's the province who provides it or the federal government, and there's various programs within each one of those levels of government. So in some ways with the housing programs, we are a creature of what they will provide us and what they provide that for. So some of that's just for rent supplement, some of that's just for building new things. So you're exactly right. It's a challenge for families who want to know what they're eligible for. So I think what we can do as best that we can is when a family's calling us, we'll try to make sure they understand what's available to them, what they're eligible for. But on an administrative level, we really are a creature of the province and the federal government on that. But certainly we're open to any suggestions that they have to simplify the process for sure.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Councillor Sless. Next on the list, first-time speaker, Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My apologies. I missed earlier a conflict of interest with 8D because it involves Rosewood House. I'm a member of the board there, so there's a perceived conflict.
Okay, and you'll fill out the form and send it into staff digitally and refrain from this. Okay, thank you. Mayor Davis, you're next on the list.
Thank you, Chair. Through to you, Aaron. Aaron, as I go through the various subcategories or expense units, as we call them, a bit hard to figure it all out, but thank you for all the work you did in consolidating it. But there seems to be a pretty consistent theme, if I can call it that runs through all of the service areas. And that's increase in administrative costs that are well beyond the rate of inflation. And that seems pretty consistent throughout. In some areas, some service areas, it's higher percentage wise, others it's a bit lower, but all in excess of inflation. So maybe hard to give me an answer that's based on a summary, but why is that? I mean, there seems to be a trend. Why is it?
Through the chair, let me, if the chair will allow it, let me take that away and work with the directors on that. Maybe I can give a better answer on that. Well, let's look at those lines. What I would say generally is that certainly that's never our intent to bring back higher administration costs, but there may be particular reasons that I don't have or can't bring to mind. So let me give a comprehensive answer to that when I can get it.
Yeah, for example, in Ontario Works Admin, it's 7.12%. Social Housing Administration, I believe it's 13.45%. That's just an example. So I'd like to go back up to page 83 of the budget summary. I'm not sure what page it is of your particular submission. It's the overview of family income stability based budget increases and decreases. And there is the other line. It goes 721,000. It says net decrease in provincial benefit expenditures and reallocation of overhead charges. Seems like a rather large amount. How much is due to what?
So maybe with your permission, Chair Carpenter, I'll ask Sue Evenden, our director, to provide that answer.
Sure.
Okay, yes, good evening, Susan Evenden, Director of Family and Income Stability. So the difficulty with the way that those categories are grouped is that included in there are a variety of things, a variety of lines, as you've identified, Mr. Mayor, through the chair, which some of which have increased, some of which have decreased. What I can tell you generally is that there was an overall funding loss going into 2021, revenue loss of $1,001,804. The restructure that the members of this committee will recall from October it was not fully absorbed within family and income stability, but across all the departments we were able to reduce for that impact to come to zero. However, then when we look at the individual budgets of each department, the impact of that restructure and that funding loss hits differently. So we did have a impact to the provincial revenue loss, and that's probably the number one driver to any increase that we have. And then we subsequently were able to find efficiencies, and they're not itemized for you individually, although we can certainly provide that information.
And then right below that, same page, says $325,420 reorganization. And that's showing, I believe, is an increase. So generally throughout the city, there has been reorganizations that take place and have been taking place that generate savings. Why is this one generating an increase?
Okay, so through the chair, Mr. Mayor, just to your previous point, I do have information that says of the 721 that you were looking at on the previous line, the breakout of that is actually $505,000 related to provincial benefit reduction and $216,000 related to overhead charges. So that's the answer to the question you asked previously. Right. And then the answer to the question you just asked, I think is the answer that I just gave in the previous question, which is on strictly our department level. The restructure did not reduce the full amount. It required the reallocations, and that's part of the restructuring that we do as well. Many of our positions are funded from various revenue streams, so we had to realign all of that. So the net impact, the net impact was neither a savings or an increase across the entire commission.
Yeah, that was going to be my last question, Chair, on this point. So, all this is generated by that change in provincial funding for employment-related services. So is the net impact zero if you take those two lines, or is there still a cost, overall cost to the city because of that restructuring imposed by the province?
So,
sorry, Aaron, were you going to respond to that?
Sorry, Sue. Through the chair, yeah, that's correct, Mayor. There was no municipal impact based on the restructure, so that all netted out to zero. That was provincially instigated by, I shouldn't say instigated, but that was provincially driven by that change to employment services. But when it all came out in terms of positions taken away and changes we made, it all came out to zero.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor McCurry, you have the floor now.
Chair, thank you. I'm thinking of something Councillor Celeste said earlier, and I'm wondering if the department and therefore council is possessed of a comprehensive list of the types and values of services and supports paid to individuals by the corporation or on behalf of the province or third parties.
Yeah, through the chair, we can make that list. Absolutely.
Okay. Aaron, have we ever looked at, obviously some of what we pay folks is strictly mandated by the province, but obviously some of it is completely discretionary as well. So I'm wondering if as part of your takeaway from this, if we could see what discretionary types of payments we make to individuals, and I'm wondering if there's a facility for you to compare those against the same types of discretionary spendings made by other municipalities on behalf of themselves or the province and other parties. Can you do that as well?
Yeah, through the chair, we can take that away. We've done some of that work previously, so we can go back to that and see what we can add for sure.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting for us to compare the degree to which we're perhaps more generous or more stingy than other communities, because we all hear anecdotally about folks that land in Brantford for various reasons. Some of them because we're perhaps more generous than our neighbors. And I think it'd be of interest at budget time for us to have a look at that. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councilor McCurry. I have no other speakers on the list. So I'm going to move on to unmet needs. There's only one unmet need here on 8D, and that's the annualized shelter bed increase. And the reason it wasn't here, I see a mover by Councilor Weaver was first and by Councilor Vanderstelt to defer it to March 8th, step 11 of the grid. This increase is, we funded this increase before from dollars that we had in, say, casino funding or other pots of money. This is annualizing it into the budget. Okay. And seeing no comments on this, I'm going to call a question on that, moving to step 11, March 8th. Call the question, Madam Clerk.
The referral of item 8D1, noting Councillor Martin's conflict, carries unanimously on recorded vote. Members of the committee voting in favor are as follows: Councillors Vanderstelt, Celeste, Antosky, Wall, Weaver, Utley, McCreary, Carpenter, Van Tilburg, and Mayor Davis.
Thank you. 8E of the budget process. Does any members wish to make any motions to any of the operating budget increases or decreases in this budget? Seeing none, I'm moving on to step 9. And just to the committee, we would normally break at 6. There's only one budget left. Would you like to push through? Or would you like to? I see thumbs up. Okay, thank you. So we'll continue. Ms. Daniels, would you please provide an overview of steps 9A and 9B, please?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So we're moving on to step 9, which is the Corporate Services 2021 operating budgets. And you can find information on this budget in the preliminary operating budget document on page 53. And if you need to, you can take the link that is at step 9A to get to those budgets. So the corporate services budget does total $12,415,913, and it's comprised of human resources, legal and real estate, clerk's department, IT services, and the finance department, for a total budget increase of 3.63%. But again, when we do factor in the commission savings as a result of the corporate-wide reorganization, the comparable year-over-year budget is an increase of 4.66%.
Thank you, Joelle. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Hutchings, CEO, to come forward and commence the corporate services operating budget, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. You're probably wondering why I'm presenting this. Over the course of the last year, I'm on again, off again, the acting, I guess, commissioner of corporate, general manager of corporate services. So met with the team, and I'll kick it off, and then each one of the 5 directors will speak specifically to their area and details in their area. So thank you very much for having us, and do the presentation. Next slide. Corporate service is made up of 5 different areas. One is the human resource departments. Second is information technology services. The third is legal. Next slide, please. Legal and real estate services departments. The fourth department is the finance departments. And last but certainly not least, and one who has most connection to the counselors, next slide, please, is our clerk services department. And as I mentioned in my CEO presentation last week or the week before, we're doing the presentation on the previous corporate structure. This department has been broken up a little bit, and some going to people, legislative services and planning, and some reporting directly to me as a CEO in the CEO's office, a treasurer reporting directly to myself. Next slide. You can see the department makes up 7.4% of the total budget at the City of Brantford. And you can see the various elements of the budget on the next pie graph, how much human resources, finance, IT, clerks, and legal make up of that total 7.4%. Next slide. It's building the budgets. The council approved budget last year was 11.980,937. There was some annualization costs from last year from the city and library HR representation, the split between the 50-50 between the two roles. We did have some changes in revenues, increased admin fees, utility group management fees, as well as decrease in reserve funding and Manulife rebate and dog licenses. We have city council initiatives, which we're speaking directly to in the legal and real estate budget. I won't get into now, but really regarding indemnification policy for staff. We had some contractual amounts, and Scott will speak to in his IT budgets. The department did go through and look for efficiencies and found about 44,388, an increase in staff. We had some one-time costs in the library and city library and HR representative getting them set up in their new job, as well as some change in overhead and some realignments due to e-scribe realignment from communications. All in all, the total new budget is for estimates is $12,415,913. I'm sorry. And you can see on the next slide, Chris, next slide, the various departments, they're what makes up their gross expenditures and their gross revenues, as well as their net tax supported budgets. The next slide, which is probably most important, looking at the 5 areas, you can see that as Joelle has just mentioned, the various increases in the various departments, and with the restructure savings, $117,000 to this department, or so this commission, total restated total $11,863,370 last year, and then this year 12,415, which is a 4.66% increase. And each one of the department directors will speak specifically to them. And first will be Anita Saloki. Anita, next slide, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchings. Through you, through Chair Carpenter to members of the Estimates Committee, I'm pleased to present the Human Resources 2021 budget. First of all, on this particular slide, I wanted to highlight the award, the 2020 Canadian HR Awards. We were a finalist among 8 other finalists across the country for the Achievers Award for Most Innovative Use of HR Technology. This particular award reflects work that the HR team did with the IT services department with respect to a digital onboarding platform. It supports 2 key components of the HR master plan, the maximization of HR technology, as well as a robust onboarding program. This particular initiative saved over 3,000 hours of person time in terms of the onboarding process and is estimated to save the corporation $200,000 annually. So it was well worth the investment of staff time in order to be able to implement that. Next slide, please. In terms of our 2021 and 2022 council priorities, the Human Resources Department is focused on 3 key initiatives. The first one is the implementation of the time and attendance system, which is transitioning from Lotus Notes program to workforce software program. The phase 1 is estimated to go live at the end of March, and phase 2 will be in May, and phase 3 in late summer. We're also working on updating our HR policies and procedures, as well as our health and safety standards. And these are the core documents that are utilized and referred to with all of our human resources initiatives, in addition to the collective agreements, but those are handled through a different process. And then the last top priority is the benefit plan design and pay equity review. These are core functions that we need to perform and are key in our collective bargaining process. Next slide, please. In terms of the human resources connections to the service delivery, the KPMG report and the council priorities, they're all listed there. I won't go through them in great detail, just to say that we are working on each one of these initiatives. Some of them have been completed already. Some are close to completion. Some will be deferred for another year as part of the HR master plan. So these are kind of our walking direction, our goals coming up, in addition to those top priorities that I just outlined in the previous slide. Next slide, please. In terms of the budget pressures and challenges for 2021, the human resources major departmental challenges is the staffing workload due to the number of recruitments and projects that we have, both corporate and departmental. Those require people resources, and that takes some of our staff away from doing other things that are important, but the recruitments and the projects are also critical support to the corporation. One of the other challenges that we have is actually leveraging the technology that we have to create data analytics for decision making and to improve efficiency. You can only make progress on things that you can measure, and so it's important for us to be able to take a look at all of those analytics and see how we can make improvements in them. In terms of budget pressures, the premium rates for our group benefits continue to increase based on the current plan design. So we're looking at different options in order to manage the benefit plan program, and that would be in conjunction with the collective bargaining with our bargaining units. Next slide, please. In terms of building the budget for human resources, the 2020 council approved budget was just over 2.1 million. There are a number of things that are impacting the 2021 budget. Mr. Hutchings outlined the City Library HR representative, which is an excellent program that is a joint effort between the library and the city. City staff have been involved in assisting the library with their recruitments, with their COVID pressures, and with their collective bargaining. In terms of changes to revenue, we are phasing out the surplus that we've been experiencing from Manulife so that that can go towards the corporate surplus rather than be directly in the HR budget. We have reduced revenues from Brantford Power. They have their own HR staff, so they no longer need to rely on city staff. And there's also the removal of the Health and Safety Accident Prevention Reserve funding for the health and safety intern that we've been hiring for the last several years. We have a few council initiatives. The 2020 Employee Recognition Program had to be deferred last year due to COVID, so that's now been incorporated into the 2021 budget from council. And the naloxone spray kits were installed in all of the AED units back in 2019. They have a 2-year shelf life, and so we have to replace those spray kits in 2021. The contractual, our benefit consultant annualization, we used to have a benefit consultant that was paid directly from the premiums that we paid to Manulife. That process has changed, and we are now billed by a new benefit consultant. So things are a lot more transparent in terms of the work that they do for us and the information that we gather from them. The HR department has also found over $11,000 in various efficiencies across the department. This is for things like meals, travel, training, registration fees. We're also eliminating the MSDS online software program. That is something that suppliers need to provide to us in any event, and there's lots of options available for searching that on the internet. So we've been able to remove that cost from our budget as well. In terms of employee compensation, there's just over $55,000 in base wage and benefit increases. The one-time city library expenses for the computer that was used by the, or was needed for the HR representative. And then we have just over $16,000 in corporate overhead recoveries. And so our 2021 adjusted base budget is $2.2 million. And the Human Resources Department does not have any unmet needs in 2021. So I will now pass the screen over to Scott Hall, our Director of Information Technology Services.
Thanks, Anita. Good evening. I'm Scott Hall, Director of Information Technology Services. And thank you, Chair Carpenter and members of the committee for your time and consideration as I present our 2021 operating budget. Next slide, please. Within IT services, we have three divisions. The corporate information team is responsible for corporate application implementation and support, database management, development, and integration services. The business solutions team provide project management for large IT projects, such as the current workforce time and attendance system implementation. And our last team is the IT infrastructure services and support, which manage our IT service desk, the desktop and mobile device support, the network and server infrastructure, security, and unified communications, or otherwise known as the telephony system. Across these three divisions, the 2021 net operating budget is $3,722,389. This represents a 7.33% increase and is attributable to the following reasons. Just over 117,000 for impacts of a corporate reorg, just over 70,000 for base wage and benefit increases, and combined these two represent just over 50% of our increase. We have an increase in software licensing fees. Those are the maintenance and yearly support costs that we pay for software. There's typically a 2% increase that's included in there, as well as when we buy additional software or we buy new software as a result of capital purchases. These go up on a yearly basis. We saw just over $20,000 increase in unified communication lines costs. And we also saw another just close to $22,000 increase as we move the eScribe alignment from communications, which is the webcasting component, moved from their budget to our budget. And to offset these, we had increased Brantford Power Management fees in just over $24,000. We were able to identify just over $17,000 in efficiencies, such things as office supplies, training supplies, some hardware licenses that were retired, and some decreased communication line costs. And then lastly, we also saw a recovery of corporate overhead and department recoveries of just over $27,000. Next slide, please. So we've identified the following as our top priorities of 2021. First, we have the new City Hall. This is a significant project for IT services, and the work we're undertaking is critical to the success of our new facility. This includes the procurement and deployment of the technologies that will support staff working at the new office location or remotely as part of the work from home model. We are working to complete the setup and configuration of the new data center and network infrastructure, which includes the migration of approximately 300 servers, primarily virtual, from the existing location at 84 Market. We are upgrading the unified communications hardware and services, and we'll be providing support for the audio and visual technologies located throughout the facility, including the new council chambers and the live streaming of meetings into the future. Next is the deployment of technologies to strengthen our security posture. And lastly, we want to continue providing leadership from an IT perspective, the expertise and the support for departmental initiatives that allow us to leverage existing technologies and improve service delivery. And at the bottom of this slide are two additional awards that complement the award that Anita spoke to. One for the same project, we were the finalist with IT World Canada on the digital transformation side. And in 2020, the MISA, which is the Municipal Information Systems Association for Ontario, we were an award winner in the Excellence of Municipal Systems category. With any luck, we will be submitting for this year for our webcast sharing project. So we're really hoping to see some recognition for that as well. Next slide, please. With respect to both the council priorities and the service delivery opportunities identified by KPMG, there are two specific priorities that we'd like to review and provide greater detail in terms of IT, the role IT services will have moving forward. First, we have creating a digital city by leveraging technology. KPMG provided a number of opportunities and suggestions, some of which had already been identified and in the process of implementing. These include, but not limited to, a new asset management, inventory management and work order system, new property tax system, new electronic records management system, a water billing system upgrade, an upgrade to our CRM, our customer relationship management software. As Anita mentioned, completing the workforce time and attendance system implementation, and enhancing our online services with electronic applications, forms, and payments. Next, we have the development review process and the technology and information recommendations with this report, where what we are doing in this case is we are purchasing additional software from our vendor who supplies the Amanda permanent licensing system, which will allow us to essentially integrate with other systems and introduce greater efficiencies. And lastly, we're working closely with the development review process team to review recommendations and provide direction for enhancing existing software solutions and or the procurement of new technologies to meet these needs. Next slide, please. Information technology services identified two unmet needs for this year. The first is a systems engineer. We're requesting a system engineer who can design, monitor, and optimize technologies that include a hyper-converged virtual server and storage system, backup and disaster recovery solutions, email systems, and file servers. As per the in-camera discussion on February 9th, this position will play an important role in our security initiatives. Currently, we only have one system engineer managing these technologies. The increased demand for technologies to support city programs and major capital projects and initiatives or opportunities identified as part of the recent service reviews also require the provisioning of servers and storage, growth planning, backup configuration and testing, and often the configuration and installation of new applications. This represents significant workload and responsibility for a single systems engineer. Not having the redundancy often results in delays in projects and deliverables. The benefits of adding a system engineer include a reduction in overtime, improved work-life balance, and improved service delivery to city staff, both from a project and support perspective. In 2020, the current system engineer recorded 167.5 hours in overtime, or approximately 24 days. The team of engineers, primarily network engineers, recorded just over 420 hours amongst the four of them. Next slide, please. The next position is what we're referring to as the audiovisual or AV engineer. We're requesting an audiovisual engineer who can assume responsibility for the implementation, management, maintenance, and support of the technologies and solutions required to meet the collaboration, conferencing, presentation, and meeting management needs of our organization. This includes the production of live stream feeds at various meetings, including council, committee, task force, PICs, whether virtual, hybrid, on-site in the council chambers, or in the future at remote locations. The demand for live streaming has increased, and the complexity and technical requirements to support hybrid and off-site meetings will require someone with the skills, knowledge, and time to ensure they run smoothly. Going forward, the eScribe administration role currently performed by clerk staff will transition to this new position and assume they will resume responsibility for the administration and rollout of the software throughout the organization as the corporate meeting management solution for meetings not managed by clerk staff. This change will allow clerk staff to focus on their roles and responsibility rather than spending significant time providing technical and troubleshooting support for eScribe, as is the practice today. The addition of the AV engineer provides the organization with a resource with a focus on leveraging technology and ensure that staff and members of council have the tools they need to be more efficient and provide improved service delivery, which is all part of the move to becoming a digital city. Next slide, please. Our last slide addresses the major departmental challenges and budget pressures faced by IT services. The first is workload, multiple projects, and managing expectations. As mentioned, the demand for both IT resources and staff within city departments are high. Staff assigned to projects are often juggling tasks assigned by the project manager in addition to their day-to-day workloads. The consequence of not having dedicated resource on projects often results in competing priorities and delays. In the past, we've seen projects where staff were seconded and backfilled as part of the project costs. This is a practice that I've seen, in years past, but we haven't done recently. And I think we need to revisit this practice and determine if this is the best way or the preferred approach for these future projects. And the next is IT security, which we've discussed previously. And the last challenge is staff retention and recruitment. In the past month alone, we've had 2 staff leave our team to take positions elsewhere. One was a network engineer and the other was a technical system specialist. We are also finding that we aren't always attracting the ideal candidates and will need to post the position 2 or 3 times to find the right person. Finishing up with respect to budget pressures, within our operating budget, we have 2 accounts, one for computer software and the other for computer hardware, which have a total of about $110,000, or representing 2.6% of our operating budget. While these are significant funds, they are the only funds we have available to us to support unplanned replacement or maintenance of equipment, requests for cabling, our IT department needs such as laptops and monitors, or fund new initiatives or respond to needs both within IT or corporately. As a point of reference, the cost of a single firewall with first-year maintenance and licensing would use 50% of this budget, or just over 80% of the computer hardware account alone. And I think we'll pass that along next to Heidi. Next slide.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, and thank you, Chair Carpenter and members of the Estimates Committee for the opportunity to present the 2021 proposed net operating budget for legal and real estate services. Next slide, please. So the proposed net operating budget for this particular area of the city is $1,008,010, which is covering 3 different divisions. Legal and real estate services, which consists of your legal department as well as your real estate division. Insurance and risk management, which is new this year to legal and real estate services after realignment from the city clerk's department, as well as the provincial offenses court administration, which is the responsibility of this municipality to run on behalf of both the people of Brantford, the county of Brant, and we also prosecute matters on behalf of the 6 nations. We are proposing a 15.1% increase, which seems a little bit steep at first blush, but this is primarily attributable to base wage and benefit increases, which represent $66,238. And then secondarily, the council approved amendments to the city's indemnification policy, which proposed coverage in the amount of $50,000 to cover staff requests under that policy, which is new this year, and which was approved by City Council in December of last year by way of report 2020-562. I should note that that entire amount from the report was approximately $100,000, $50,000 of which is carried by the city's legal department's professional services budget. The other $50,000, I believe, is carried in the mayor's budget. So you may see that secondary amount in another budget line. We also have increased costs of professional services, which includes external legal counsel necessary for specialized matters, both opinions and litigation, appraisal services, which are necessary at times when we divest of certain properties or when we're proposing to acquire properties, as well as process servers where the city of Brantford finds itself in the position of plaintiff. We also have a small amount, an increase in the cost of a research database. That research database is called Westlaw, and those costs continue to climb year over year. Next slide, please. So the Legal and Real Estate Services Department has a number of key priorities which align with Council's priorities. The top priorities are here for the Estimates Committee's review. I wish to highlight a few of those which relate to the disposition of land, specifically the Coburn Point Expression of Interest, which is an ongoing project and closes at the end of this month, as well as the creation of a disposition strategy for the city-owned and revitalized lands at the Mohawk Lake District, which is being led by our real estate manager, Ron Gasparetto, as well as the execution of the strategic disposition of a number of capital assets which were identified through the 2019 estimates process, and that is an ongoing project of this department. And those lands which were identified through that process will be sold to fund other initiatives of City Council. We're also looking forward to completing contracts arising from both the boundary agreement and shared services with the County of Brant. as well as modernizing various systems to overcome some of the bureaucratic processes that we find, especially within our court system. So highlighting particularly modernization of our provincial offenses court systems relating to the e-disclosure of documentation through prosecution, as well as e-ticketing, which is an initiative we have with our police agencies. Also new this year through the insurance and risk management realignment, we're looking at acquiring new or renewed insurance policies for the City of Brantford. And as Mr. Wallace mentioned in his presentation, we're also looking at bringing the social housing portfolio into the corporate insurance portfolio and hopefully realizing some efficiencies through that process. In addition, our completion of our corporate risk management and claims handling strategy will hopefully identify areas where we could save money on some of our insurance premiums, where we have policies that are underutilized and maybe can be reviewed by staff, and updates can be proposed to City Council. And finally, in aligning with Ms. Saloki's presentation, we're looking forward to working with our Human Resources Department on updating a number of our city policies, and in particular, updating the code of conduct for city employees to better align that code with the code that council adopted itself last year in 2020. Next slide, please. So this slide is simply demonstrating how legal and real estate services and the top priorities that we have identified through this presentation, as well as in our work plan and our goals, align with the service delivery efficiencies that council has identified, as well as council priorities and the various priorities identified through the KPMG report. So I won't go through these in any particular detail, just noting that we are aware of those priorities and we continue to seek alignment through our work program here in legal and real estate services. Next slide, please. Legal and Real Estate Services is proposing one unmet need for committee's consideration, and that unmet need is a leasing coordinator. Our real estate division currently consists of the real estate manager, as well as not a full-time FTE through a real estate clerk. Our real estate clerk is assigned to a number of different tasks across the organization. And increasingly, our real estate manager is finding himself in the position of a lease negotiator, license negotiator. He negotiates encroachment agreements, which were realigned from public works into real estate services. Leases and licenses that previously were handled through what was formerly the city's Parks and Recreation Department are now on the desk of your real estate manager, as well as negotiating leases and maintaining the leases for the city's airport and a number of other facilities across the corporation. In total, this leasing portfolio has a value of approximately $1.2 million and is not the primary responsibility of the real estate manager, but he is accountable for that portfolio. And so we're recommending that this committee approve an unmet need for a leasing coordinator to ensure that this portfolio is tracked, is handled in a more commercially prudent manner, and due attention is given to these types of agreements that the City of Brantford relies on in terms of revenue generation, as well as protecting the city's property assets. Next slide, please. So in terms of budget pressures and challenges, a theme that I believe this committee has heard this evening is a growing demand for services across the organization, as well as the complexity of files handled in-house by your staff, which take additional time to deal with. As the city grows, so do its legal challenges, and that certainly is a challenge for this department. Included in that are the challenges in real estate services in terms of increasing responsibility for that leasing portfolio I previously mentioned. Also responsibility for the encroachment policy, which was previously in the Public Works Commission, and the increasing demand to ensure that we are disposing of our land in a prudent manner, testing the markets, and being more proactive in that regard. Additionally, on the provincial offenses court side, we have outdated IT infrastructure and a lack of legislative authority to run an early resolution court, which we are working on this year, but requires specific legislation from the provincial government that has been stalled. As well, in terms of our budget pressures, we have had significant pressures due to the court closures arising from COVID-19 that has decreased revenues this year, and we anticipate a significant amount of decreased revenues for the first half of 2021. Those have not been accounted for in this budget, aside from the COVID implications that the finance department is handling. But we are hopeful that our courts can reopen, and had we had the authority to run an early resolution court, we may have been able to realize on some of this revenue earlier on, as well as increasing costs of external professionals, both in terms of property valuations, so those are your appraiser professionals, and specialized litigation, in particular labor litigation and arbitration. We have outsourced some of that in the past year as well. So I believe the next presenter is Joel Daniels, our city treasurer. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Daniels.
Thank you, Heidi. Next slide, please. So the 2021 net operating budget for the finance department is $3,856,925. That's across 5 divisions: our financial analysis, or our budget division, accounting, tax and customer services, purchasing, and administration. The finance budget is seeing a 3.54% decrease in 2021, which is made up of increases to base wages and benefits, as well as our increased cost to professional services, namely for our assessment-based consultant, which I'll speak to a bit more on a later slide, as well as budget decreases related to increased revenues in the form of overhead recoveries from our rate-supported services that we support, increased revenues from tax and customer services admin fees, as well as our P card incentive program rebate. And finance did see significant savings as a result of the corporate reorg of almost $235,000. Next slide, please. I just want to briefly touch on some of our top priorities for 2021. The first is the implementation of an area-specific development charge for the expansion lands, as well as an update to the citywide development charges bylaw. We're implementing a number of new software packages, including updates to our property tax and utility billing systems. And as well, our payroll staff is providing key support to the workforce time and attendance system implementation as well. We're committed to a budget process review that includes a separate user rate budget and consideration for future multi-year budgeting, as well as expansion of the online invoicing and payment options for city services. Next slide, please. This slide just shows how finance is connected to a number of the KPMG service delivery options, as well as council priorities. And I won't go through them in detail, but certainly finance is having a hand in the boundary expansion lands by way of that area-specific development charge review, continual review of tax rate fairness, continued investigation into new group buying and corporate contract opportunities, a commitment to establish a multi-year budget process for the incoming council, as well as providing support to the development of shared services agreements with our boards. And that also extends to a new cost sharing agreement with the County of Brant. Next slide, please. So just to highlight some departmental challenges, again, common theme, staff workload and the resources that are needed to meet the future growth and demand for finance services. And as well, this year, COVID-19 has been a particular challenge. The city has received funding from various provincial programs, and they all come with a bit of unique and onerous reporting and tracking requirements. And COVID-19 also required us very quickly to expand online payment options for our customers and the public, which resulted in a large in-house effort in 2020 and continuing into this year to introduce new functionality in that regard. With respect to budget pressures, we have minimal pressures on the budget for 2021 in finance, but we are increasing the budget for our assessment-based management consultants. We do expect there to be some large assessment appeals that are going to be dealt with in 2021, which is driving up the need for those specialized external services. And I will just say here that we did decrease our tax write-off budget by an equivalent amount to mitigate this cost on the corporate budget. And you did see that reduction in the corporate finance budget, which was presented to council last week. And that's the end of my piece, and I'll turn it over to Tanya Daniels, City Clerk.
Good evening. So through to Chair and Estimates Committee, I'm Tanya Daniels, the City Clerk and Director of Clerk Services, and I too am pleased to present to you the Clerk Services budget following my fellow directors, namely following right behind another Daniels. Next slide, please. So in 2021, our net operating budget is $1,607,668,000, which comes from 3 areas of service. First one being legislative services, which includes civil ceremonies. The second being elections, licensing, and administrative services, which does include the business and lottery program, vital stats, and animal control services. The third being records, print, and mail and FOI services. The clerk's budget is proposed with a 5.05% increase, which is attributed to mainly base wage and benefit increases, some contractual cost increases to our animal control program. We're minusing out some efficiencies that we have found in our area. Then we've had some revenue decrease impacts, and there's some other cost increase. Next slide, please. This slide provides for the 2020 approved budget and the various attributed factors which have the clerk's operating submission budget, as I just previously highlighted. Next slide, please. Clerk Services is coming out of an exceptional year with a new director and clerk commencing earlier in the year and the needing to pivot like many of my colleagues during unprecedented operational time of a pandemic. We introduced many changes to our operations this past year, most notably the virtual operations of council that we are using tonight. With the small but mighty team, we've had many priorities. We wanted to highlight a certain few. Achieving the operational needs of council and its various boards and committees and task forces in both the current virtual format and a future format returning to either in-person or hybrid. In 2020, we saw over 180 meetings were executed alongside the new learning of virtual operations. And as we look forward into 2021, those operational needs are increasing. And there will be a time where we are transitioning back to either in-person or a hybrid type of operation, as Mr. Hall introduced as well. Clerks is very passionate and committed to their role of assisting and bringing the organization's work to the council and committee table, which also is based on very strict timelines. Our second is the corporate records modernization and the movement to the electronic records management program, which will be a key part of the program that will be assisting the organization in preparation for the move to Dalhousie. There are many great plans and assistance that have happened in the background within this portfolio, and the work is far from over. The transition to a more electronic records program greatly assists with research projects, access requests, and will be a key element in council-supported work from home strategy. Number 3, the balancing of competing council priorities and direction across the clerk services department is an everyday and sometimes every hour process. We have competing report requests and direction, general operation demands, and incoming items that may produce additional task forces, which all factor into that balance. Our workload far exceeds the 35-hour work week. So we move, adjust, change, and pivot constantly to look at how to balance those needs. The 4th item is the council composition, governance, and ward boundary review. Council will see the report coming in the next few weeks for phase 1, and then should we move to phase 2, the work will begin immediately after. As 2022 is an election year, this work must be completed this year should any changes want to be implemented for that next election. Next slide, please. As clerk services involved in 6 deliverables with the service delivery and KPMG recommendations from a more direct involvement. While I'm sure there are many that will be sort of peripherally either contacted or contributing to, there are 6 that really drive home for us. They're all important, but the digital city and the council governance review are 2 that really stand out as front leaders in the connection to our clerks programs and services. Next slide, please. We are submitting to you tonight an unmet need for your consideration for administrative support, mainly for the legislative services area and for the city clerk role. This role will be key in helping to respond to daily operation needs of the clerk's team, mainly by the legislative division and again, the city clerk directly. Clerks is tasked with bringing all the great work of our colleagues to various meetings, and we are under-resourced for that need in the organization. In 2020, the team committed an additional 1,200 hours for the over 180 meetings that were conducted. While this was heightened in 2020, it is not unusual. In 2019, there were over 700 hours logged. And in some cases, many staff do not actually log all the additional hours they complete. They're dedicated to their roles and often max out their banks within the first quarter of the year. A highlight for this is the time analysis in the current team of 5 had dedicated over 6,700 hours last year for meeting operations. This leaves each team member only about 8 to 9 weeks of the year to dedicate to any peripheral work required of their roles. This is simply not enough time to complete all that is required, so we do extra hours in order to accommodate that. As an example, every delegate takes approximately 3 hours of work, and each meeting takes approximately 10 to 20 hours of prep depending on the type. We generally do not have a free night from Monday to Thursday, and we are juggling booking meetings every day and have many days we are running more than one meeting. And that is with pandemic operations not seeing all task forces and committees running in full force. This new role would help find greater efficiencies, focus on admin role that is conducted within our department, ensure the role is focused on the correspondence needs of a very active clerk's office. It will then further look to be a role that will alleviate senior staff levels administrative tasks by providing greater opportunity for those roles to increase their meeting support, conduct training, implement improvements in the meeting process, and work on various needed topics and assisting meetings that are not clerked currently by the clerk's office staff. The role is connected to the desire to achieve the KPMG service delivery of leveraging existing technology, which takes in the forms of the CityNet, eForms, eScribe, looking at the city website, and increasing those efficiencies, increasing online customer service, and providing expanded resources both internally and externally. Next slide, please. A major department challenge coming for 2021 is definitely the staffing workload and resources needed for the program and services coordinated within our department, which are far exceeding the normal work week hours. As mentioned, we have submitted for an unmet need to help alleviate some of this pressures and challenge that we face. Another challenge is that, and it is definitely morphing into a strength of ours, is transitioning the customer service and online service options for our various programs, which include preparations for the new City Hall. Many of our programs have seen changes over the past year, but more work is needed to prepare for the move to the new City Hall and a modernization of our services and programs that we deliver. And a reflection on 2020 has been for budget pressures in the form of impacts to decreasing revenue or various programs, mainly business, lottery, marriage, and the dog licensing program. With that, thank you for your time and consideration. And I believe now Brian takes the next slide.
Certainly do. If I can find my buttons. Thank you. Just to wrap up, Mr. Chair, just a couple last slides. We have the unmet needs for the IT services systems engineer. And again, that was explained much further in camera meeting regarding the security. Next slide, Chris. As well as Heidi has mentioned the necessary need for the leasing coordinator, the amount of assets that controls, and the amount of work going on in the administrative clerk's department is unmet need as well. The last but certainly not least, the AV court engineer with the new City Hall and many things going on, eScribe, and many things going online and virtual today. Next slide. Just to wrap things up, we have the 5 divisions, departments presented, and corporate services. And we'll open the floor to any questions, Mr. Chair, to the directors.
Thank you very much. That was a lengthy presentation and a lot of information there. I do have members of the committee who wish to ask questions on the presentation. First of all, I have Councillor Utley, then Councillor Weaver. Councillor Utley, you have the floor, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Anita. Anita, could you tell us where most of the turnover occurs in the organization? And I've got 2 or 3 parts to the question. One is, what is where are those turnovers happening? Are they happening more in some departments than others? Number 1, do they happen mostly with subsidized work that we like for summer jobs, as an example? And thirdly, how much staff time is taken up with constantly hiring people from the same departments?
Through you, Chair Carpenter, in response to Councillor Utley's question, the turnover is throughout the corporation. I wouldn't be able to target any particular department, and maybe target's not the right word, but it is throughout the corporation. And in some cases, we are required to go out 2 or in some cases 3 times with the same posting to try and attract suitably qualified candidates for positions. It is a challenge with this particular labor market to find those candidates. All municipalities are looking for those same resources and qualifications. We have an aging workforce, And it takes time to train staff and bring them up to the level of skills and qualifications that we require them at. With the size of our municipality, we try and hire from within and promote from within. And so that leads to situations where we are then backfilling for those positions. And ultimately, we're then recruiting at the entry level. So that's an example, summary of some of those pressures that we're facing. Hopefully that answers your question, Councillor Lee.
If you had a solution, what would it be?
Through you, Chair Carpenter. I don't think there's just one solution. We need to continually enhance the skills and qualifications of our individuals. We do provide considerable training. We have a leadership continuum that we continue to fund. Even with our budget pressures, we know that it's important to provide those resources. So I don't think there's an overall answer to it. Just continuing to work with our post-secondary institutions and provide those opportunities for young individuals starting on their career.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Utley. Councillor Weaver, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is about the leasing coordinator. So, hi Heidi. So my question is, are we going to find any efficiencies or any revenue generation with the hire of this person?
So through Chair Carpenter to the committee, in terms of efficiencies, in part this is being driven because workload that was previously on other staff who are still in the organization but did not constitute a full FTE has been brought into the real estate portfolio. So this is one of those sort of death by 1,000 cuts issue here, where we didn't have a full FTE to bring in to then find the funding for this. And then additionally, I believe actually that the identification of this entire portfolio and sort of the setting aside of a particular staff position to help handle it will increase revenues to the municipality in terms of not having our leases just float on a month to month, having someone's eyes on them, checking market rates, ensuring the increases are brought forward in an appropriate and commercially prudent manner. Not that it is not handled appropriately now, but the time and attention that should be given to a portfolio of this nature just simply isn't possible with the workload of the existing manager. But the revenues do not hit this budget. So revenues from the leases that are managed by this particular position go to a number of different lines within the organization. So, I mean, if the money was kept in-house, it would essentially pay for itself, but that money is used throughout the organization for good purposes. For instance, we manage all the leases at the airport, but those monies don't come into our portfolio and they're used to reinvest in that particular facility.
Okay, thank
and for
you.
other reasons.
Okay. My next question is for Clerk's Department. Hi, Tanya. Would you be able to tell council how many FOIs have been were submitted in 2019 and then do another one for 2020?
So through the chair. So in 2019, there was 101 that were submitted. Then for 2020,
Look at you, all ready for the question.
Got it. Yeah.
101.
2019 was 101.
Okay.
And 2020 was 117.
Okay.
We are forecasting every year that goes up.
Okay, thank you for that. And then my next question is, so you touched base on basically the amount of hours worked additionally. So is it used, is time in lieu used, or is overtime booked? How does that work for your division?
Certainly through the chair, it depends really on the employee because there are various contracts that are at play. So a lot of that group is not in a pocket to be paid out for their overtime. So what we do is we make sure that we book in extra time away, which then just sort of feeds into the, Heidi's death by 1,000 cuts. It just sort of becomes this process where we are just constantly chasing our tail because we had extra hours. So we took time off, but then that created more hours and then we just keep on going. So that's sort of the process in the circle that we're in.
Would you be able to calculate the cost of that overtime? Whether that be, somebody's taking time in lieu, so now that person needs to be replaced for any amount of time, or maybe that then prolongs the project that they're working on because they're taking some extra time off, versus the cost of the FTE? I'm gonna actually be happy to move this in hopes that I get that information and it kind of paints the picture for us. So could you have that to us by the time this comes back, please?
Certainly through the chair, I'll do my best. Some of it isn't quantifiable info, but I'll do my very best to again capture, but I guarantee you the amount that we're offsetting by hiring is we're far exceeding that in the expenses on the other side.
I call that your best guesstimate.
Yeah, my best guesstimate, exactly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Councilor Weaver. I see no more questions in the queue. Okay, I'm going to move on to step 9D, and I'm going to do these one at a time. Seeking a mover for the systems engineer, Councilor Weaver, seconded by Councilor Antosky. Questions or comments on this? Seeing none, I'll call the question on systems engineer being moved to step 11 on March 8th.
The referral of item 9D1 carries unanimously on recorded votes. Members of the committee vote in favor as follows. Councillors Vanderstelt, Celeste, Martin, Antosky, Wall, Weaver, Utley, McCreary, Carpenter, Van Tilburg, and Mayor Davis.
Thank you. I'm going to be moving on to 9.2D, which is the leasing coordinator for legal and real estate department. Seeking a mover at Councillor Vanderstelt, seconded by Councillor Weaver. Any questions or comments on this? I see none. I'm going to call the question on this one to be moved to step 11.
The referral of item 9D2 carries unanimously on recorded votes. Members of the committee voting in favor as follows. Councillors Vanderstelt, Celeste, Martin, Antosky, Wall, Weaver, Utley, McCreary, Carpenter, Van Tilburg, and Mayor Davis.
Okay, and 9D3, I already have a mover, and Councillor Weaver said he would move this one, seconded by Councillor Vanderstelt. Questions or comments from the committee to move this to step 11? Okay, I'll call the question.
The referral of item 9D3 carries unanimously on recorded vote. Members of the committee voting in favor as follows. Councillors Vanderstelt, Celeste, Martin, Antosky, Wall, Weaver, Utley, McCreary, Carpenter, Van Tilburg, and Mayor Davis.
Okay, looking for a mover for 9D4, which is the audio visual AV engineer, to be moved to step 11. Do I have a mover? I do not see a mover. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on then to step 9E. Do members wish to make any motions to any other operating budget increases than the ones listed today on this before us? Seeing none, thank you. I'm going to move on to ask Joel to give us an update of where we are in step 9F. Thank you.
All right, through you, Mr. Chair, no changes this evening. So the 2021 operating budget remains at $167,862,565. That's a budget impact after assessment growth of 2.62% and an average residential tax impact of 3.2% or $104.83, an average multi-residential tax impact of 2.92%, an average commercial tax impact of 1.01%, and an average industrial tax impact of 2.01%.
Thank you. And moving on and to next week's meeting of March 3rd, we'll be dealing with at 4:30. We'll also be dealing with engineering and public works. That's a large budget, a significant budget. I'll try and make sure that right after that meeting, all members of the committee are provided with the items that will be moved, that have been moved forward to step 11, so you can have time to review them and ask your questions and figure out how you want to discuss that. Thank you. This concludes our meeting tonight, March 3rd. We'll see you March 3rd. Thank you, 4:30. Thank you for your work.
Good night, everyone.